Hi, Blackjack. Oh, no, there's a cat. Yep. For some reason, our big fluffy cat Elsa has been extremely snuggly today and keeps hopping on my lap. All right. So I've got your book here. Yes, I know, printer. I know we're low on. I swear, it's every couple of seconds with this guy. Anyway, how goes Blackjack? We'll probably only go for an hour today to give me a little bit of extra time to do some editing afterwards. Then I can also, not have to edit as much for a little bit. But I figured we might as well do some story night tonight. No reason to put it off. I believe this is a laser printer. I could be wrong about that. Oh god, I actually don't remember. It's also a scanner. And a fax machine. So, you know how it be. It's a multi-purpose thingamajigger. It's actually been a long time since I've looked at the internals of this thing. So what have you been up to, Blackjack? Let's see here. Just checking ahead to see how much. Okay, like 4 to 5 pages per chapter. That's not too bad. We can probably do 2 chapters today. Oh yeah, no. I don't. So what ends up happening with my printer is I actually don't use it. So I use it so little that the ink dries up in the cartridge. So it's more just that the ink in the cartridge is slowly dying all the time. Two. Anywho. This is Of Men and Dragons, Book 1, Chapter 24 by Dr. Blackjack 21. Jack was the last to wake up, as was now tradition. Embryl had gotten up early to cook, which was quickly becoming her chosen role, and Jack could definitely smell the bacon in the air. He was starting to wonder just how long his bacon stores would last at the current rate of consumption. Embryl was explaining her latest lesson to Shahar as she wrapped some sort of bread and egg mixture in bacon, secured it with a toothpick, and fried the bacon roll-ups in a skillet. "I'm telling you, they tamed lightning. This whole ship is powered by lightning. They are running off of stored-up lightning at the moment. Usually they make new lightning by creating a small star inside the ship. With their ship damaged, they can't do that right now. Instead, they're going to borrow some of the powers of our sun." Shahar's look was split between impatience and confusion as she tried to simultaneously will the food to cook more quickly and listen to what Embryl had to say. "But what happens if they take our sun's power? Won't it get colder?" Angela was starting to trust Embryl more and more in the kitchen, but still kept half an eye on the girl's work as the AI responded. "It won't affect the heat of your planet any more than the plants around you do. They've been doing the same thing as long as they've existed, taking the sun's power and turning it into energy they use to grow and flourish. By the time the power of your sun reaches us here on your planet, it's already done its thing, and your sun doesn't need it anymore." Embryl begins the first batch of Emerald finished the first batch and set a plate of them in front of Shahar and Jack. Shahar grabbed a piece a little too eagerly and started to toss it into her mouth before Emerald snatched it out of the air while admonishing Shahar. You don't just eat the whole thing. You have to slide it off the toothpick like... Yeah. No, I'm going to redo that. You have to slide it up the toothpick like... That. That. Nah. That doesn't flow well. You have to slide it up the toothpick like so. In the overly delicate way only Emerald seemed capable of, holding on to one end of the toothpick. She placed the morsel in her mouth and drew the toothpick out before chewing. Emerald's eyes were half closed in rapture, and Shahar quickly followed suit. Soon all speech had ended, filling the ship with a comfortable silence as the two predators lost themselves in the flavor of their food. Jack wasn't going to miss out and took some for himself. The bacon was the primary flavor of the food. Unsurprisingly, it went well with the egg. The bread was more for texture and made the meal a little bit more filling. But there was also a hint of garlic and something else with a little zest Jack couldn't place. The confusion was evident on his face because Angela supplied an explanation. The mystery flavor is celery salt. Jack wasn't sure what that even was, but then again, Angela usually took care of stocking the ship with supplies, so he wasn't surprised to have a spice he'd never heard of on board. Angela was pleased with the effect the meal was having on everyone's spirits, but decided it was time to get down to business. Since you got the tunnels dug out, the next step is to run the power cables out to the side of the mountain. With a little luck, we'll have the solar panels up and working in a day or two. I do a very good gravelly but cute Emerald. I appreciate that. That makes me happy. The group had demolished the first 3 batches, but as Emerald pulled off the fourth batch, Jack swiped them all before either predator could get a bite and put them in a container to take out to the workers. We can run the cables this evening, but first, I want to go check up on the workers. They probably have enough shaped wood to begin the first lodge. Shahar gave Jack a glare that quite handily explained how dangerous it was to come between a hungry predator and her food. And you are taking my bacon away because... Jack held up a hand and started counting his fingers. First, too much of one thing isn't healthy. You need more variety in your diet. Second, you've already had enough breakfast. If you overeat, you'll be sick all morning, and we won't get anything done. Third, those workers came all the way out here and risked a lot to help us out. This will be a good thank you. Fourth, can you think of anything else that would... Hold up. That would inspire loyalty in the workers faster than bacon? Fifth, okay, I didn't think it through enough to have a fifth and assumed I'd just come up with one before I got there. But the previous 4 should be enough reasons. Shahar glared at Jack for a few more moments before slowly allowing her gaze to wander. Fine, I guess you get to live. For now. Jack bowed his head in exaggerated gratitude. Your benevolence is an inspiration to us all. Jack brought out the bacon roll-ups as the workers finished their own breakfast. When he lifted the cover and the scent wafted out, all heads turned towards him. Setting the basket on a bench, Jack backed away. He knew better than to get between a bunch of Argun in their first experience with bacon. Shahar managed to restrain herself from joining in as she translated for Jack. Compliments of Emerald. She thought you all had been working hard and deserved a treat. Jack watched as the feeding frenzy began. There was a moment when Jack feared trouble was brewing as one of the younger woodworkers started to push another out of the way. However, Fayen proved to be more than that. However, Fayen proved more than up to the... However, Fayen proved more than up to wrangling her charges with a cuff to the back of the offending Argun's head. The proper pecking order established, the rest of the after-breakfast snack went off without a hitch. Good example of a sentence that probably could flow better with a couple more words. The basket was quickly emptied. Everyone was made sure of this when Lonthal held the basket upside down over his head and shook it, just to be sure there was no hidden compartment with more bacon hidden inside. Feyen shook her head in amusement at the youngster's antics as she approached Jack. When she spoke up, her gravelly voice oozed satisfaction. You keep enough food like that coming, and I might consider the rest of your debt paid. These lads don't need any help shaping more wood. Why don't you show me what you are thinking about next? I have a feeling it's not going to be what I would normally expect. Jack nodded his head and led her and Shahar over to the area he and Shahar had cleared earlier. Okay, so this is the spot I'm planning on putting up the first lodge. The first step is to put up a wooden frame like this. Jack withdrew a schematic he and Angela had drawn up from his pocket, showing the skeletal outline of the building he had planned. It didn't take as long as he feared to explain the idea of size and scale. Feyen caught on quickly. So, once the beams are in place, are you going to line the walls? Oh. Is this Feyen speaking? Okay, yeah, that is Feyen speaking. So, once you get the beams in place, are you going to line the walls in skins? I see several issues if that's the case, not the least of which is there is no way you'd retain enough heat in an area that size. I'm hoping you're not planning on making it all out of wood. It would take forever to shape enough lumber to fill in the gaps. Jack shook his head. I have something else in mind. Quicker than lumber. No. I have something else in mind. Quicker than lumber, better insulating, and easier to repair. If you can get this section up here, Jack pointed at the schematic and again at the spot on the ground he indicated. Shahar and I will get the next parts ready. Feyen looked at Jack with a combination of curiosity and skepticism. You know, my father had a saying about people promising things too good to be real. But I'll give you a chance to prove you know what you're talking about. After all, you have to pay us whether or not you waste your time. Shahar's face expressed her confidence in Jack's ability to follow through with his promises as they parted ways. They brought along Embrel and Lonthal to help with this portion of the plan. Jack explained, and Shahar translated for Lonthal. He held up a branch about 3 inches thick and 7 feet long, as well as a thinner sapling only about an inch wide. So, what we need are a combination of long, thin branches like this and So what we need are a combination of long, thin branches like this and even thinner saplings like this. Jack waved towards the forest near the lake as he continued. Shahar and Lonthal can gather those. Meanwhile, Embrel and I will get the clay, mud, and reeds we need by the lake. Just get as much as you can and load the cart up before lunch. After we eat, I'll show everyone what we'll be doing with everything. As they worked, everyone stayed more or less within sight and sound of each other, and the required materials accumulated quickly. Embrel laughed as she worked, brightening the morning work. She had mud up to her elbows, streaked across her forehead and all over her clothes. You know, I've never done work like this before. My father always said things like this were for other people to do, but this is so much more fun than learning to read and write. Page, turn page. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. Wiping her hand across her forehead in the same movement that had first put a streak of mud on her face, Embrel continued, I'm curious what you had planned for the dirt, clay, and reeds. It's exciting to see strange human technology at work. Jack grinned as he heaved another shovelful of dirt into the bucket Embrel was Jack grinned as he heaved another shovelful of dirt into the bucket Embral would take to the cart once it was filled. This is an ancient technique used by humans for thousands of years. There are better building materials, and we might switch to those eventually. But this method was used for so long precisely because of how quick and easy it is to assemble, while also providing significant protection from the elements. I wouldn't be surprised if this technique quickly spread to the surrounding villages as well. Throughout human history, it was often the least flashy technologies that had the most significant impact on the quality of life. Is he doing bricks? Embral tilted her head to the side with a mischievous grin on her face. So, the man who traveled here on a ship that sails between the said the man who traveled here on a ship that sails between the stars of the heavens. Jack shrugged as he worked. As impressive as that sentence may sound, indoor plumbing had a more substantial impact on people's lifespans than faster-than-light travel ever could have. Now Embral looked confused. You mean like your sinks and toilets on the ships? It's nice I don't have to go fetch water from a well, but I don't see how that could make a person live longer. Jack grinned as he readied another lecture for the poor girl because of such a simple question. To understand that, you first have to understand microorganisms such as bacteria. To introduce you to the subject, let me tell you the story of Jon Snow and the Broad Street Pump. Embral had an odd combination of interest and dread on her face while listening as they continued working. Shahar watched Jack and Embral laugh as they worked and wondered what crazy ideas he was explaining to her this time. As much as Shahar enjoyed the benefits of human technology, she was more interested in it working and less interested in how it worked. Still, it was good to see how far the young Argun had come in such a short time. As it was, she was probably now the third most educated person on the planet, and if Jack wasn't careful, she might become the second. Somehow, Shahar didn't think that would bother Jack in the slightest, though he might take that as a challenge. Lonthal was also watching the two laugh, but his expression was Lonthal was also watching the two laugh, but his expression was one of confusion. At Shahar's raised eye ridges, he finally voiced his thoughts. How is it that you and Embral came to understand Jack's language in such a short time? You haven't even known him for a season. And Embral has known him for even less... You haven't even known him for a season, and Embral has known him for an even shorter period. Yet the two of you seem to understand and translate for him with ease. Shahar's hands continued to work as her thoughts turned to the memories of both her and Embral going through the procedure of learning the language. After seeing it performed on Embral, she had no more understanding of what had happened than she had when it had been done to herself. Jack would hate for me to use the term human magic, but that's the best way to describe it. He simply gave us the language. Lonthal looked stunned at the idea, his hand frozen mid-chop. He simply gave you the language? Just like that? Can he give you any knowledge he wants? Shahar shook her head, not noticing Lonthal's inaction. No, apparently this only works because our minds already have the framework for the language. It didn't teach us something new so much as attach certain sounds to already existing knowledge. I'm probably the worst one to explain the idea, since I don't really understand it myself. But he can't add new information. He can only expand on existing information. There are still many words he uses that I need him to explain before I understand, and several I still don't understand after the explanation. Lonthal was having a hard time reconciling the many feats Jack had performed in such a short time with the small, unassuming man the hunter was familiar with. Then something else occurred to him. Why didn't Jack just come in and take over everything? The more I learn about him, the more powerful he seems to become. Shahar smiled as she worked. Jack is an odd man. He doesn't think twice about wielding power the likes of which you and I could never dream of. But he's not interested in using it for anything other than protecting his family. Although mostly, Jack simply wants to be left alone. Neurodivergent is anything like ADHD, autism, all that stuff. Basically, you got something that makes you think a bit different. Shahar smiled as she worked. Oh, wait, that I already read that. Lonthal looked confused again. If Jack wants to be left alone, why is he putting this outpost together? Even for him, it seems like a lot of work. So why do something so ambitious if he's not interested in being some kind of lord? Shahar considered how best to answer without giving away information that wasn't hers to reveal. Everything Jack does is for his family. Lonthal worked silently for a moment, contemplating the explanation. Eventually, the question he'd had on his mind since his revelation the other day worked its way to the surface. Looking back at Jack and Emerald, he gave voice to his thoughts. So how did Emerald become a member of Jack's family? I understand how you bonded your way into Jack's house, but Jack's relationship with Emerald is more like father and daughter, despite there being no shared blood between the two of them. Lonthal noticed a slight chill in the air before turning and seeing a dark expression on Shahar's face. Just how exactly do you think I bonded my way into his house? Lonthal realized he'd absent-mindedly said the wrong thing again, and looking back at Shahar's string of issues in the village, it was easy to see where. Holding up his hands in surrender, he quickly backpedaled. I didn't mean to imply that you slept with him just to get into his house. I just meant it's evident that there's a connection between the two of you. You two are already more close than more close than most partnered couples in the village. Shahar's expression quickly morphed from anger to confusion as she contemplated his words. True, Jack was one of her closest friends these days, along with Angela and Emerald, but Lonthal was all but outright calling them a couple. Looking at Jack, her feelings only seemed to grow more complicated on the subject. She was more protective of Jack than the other two. But that was just because he was so small and weak, right? Then there was the night at the inn. Holding Jack tightly against the wall had certainly evoked some odd emotions within her, but they had been quickly dispelled when they were interrupted by Saruhan. Looking at Jack now, smiling as he taught Emerald some new piece of human knowledge, she couldn't help but feel something warm and unsettling in the pit of her stomach. Lonthal couldn't have been more surprised by Shahar's reaction if she turned into a Wolgan in front of his eyes. Looking at the expression flitting over her face, something finally fell into place. Wait, you mean you and he haven't... You're not... Shahar turned and seized Lonthal, pinning him by his throat against the tree. If you value your life, you will not say another word on the subject. Lonthal nodded emphatically, but Shahar couldn't help but notice the laughter hadn't left his eyes. Whatever relationship the two of us has is none of your business. Understand? Shahar stared at him a moment longer before realizing he couldn't answer as long as she cut off his air supply. She let him go, and the hunter slumped to the ground. He took a moment to catch his breath before looking up with a big grin on his face. Just promise me that when you two make it official, you'll invite me to the bonding ceremony. I want to see what kind of party Jack's going to throw. Shahar was undeniably the better combatant, but her mind was elsewhere at the moment. Even if Lonthal hadn't been expecting the half-hearted swipe that followed his statement, it had been so clearly telegraphed that he had plenty of time to get out of the way. Standing back up, he held up his hands in surrender and voiced his peace offering. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist a little fun at your expense. Usually it's me one step behind, and I couldn't help myself. I'll stop, though, I swear. She glared at him, narrowed his eyes, measuring his... She glared at him, narrowed eyes measuring his response, before turning and walking away, still trying to work out her feelings on the matter. Still grinning to himself, Lonthal gathered up a handful of saplings and followed her to the cart. All right. We're getting closer and closer to the halfway point. It's going to happen. All right. What time is it? 7:26. That actually didn't take me nearly as long as I expected. And I see we have a very cute cat sitting up on the desk. I'm going to turn on a light real quick because light is starting to fade from the room. All right. I'll be right back. All right. I have found my water again. Actually, that's one nice thing. I recently got a new water filter, so this is kind of putting the water filter through its paces. All right. Where was I? Right, chapter 25. Blackjack, how far are you through book 2? Oh, nice. I didn't realize that you actually finished it. What the heck? I'm never going to catch up at this rate. Where was I? Okay. Gotta make sure I'm all prepared. Nothing's distracting me. Like that cute cat over in the corner right there. You go to sleep, Bart. I'm talking to you, but you go to sleep. By the time that I read book 2, you'll be halfway done with book 4. Oh, God. You'll be through a book and a half, you say. Now then. Lonthal Emperor. I'm restarting right away because I forgot to actually preface this with the title. This is Of Men and Dragons, Book 1 by... Oh, nope. Try that again. Restart. Begin again. This is Of Men and Dragons, Book 1, Chapter 25 by Dr. Blackjack21. Lonthal, Embrel, and Phaean were standing in front of the framework of the building the woodworkers had put together by following Jack's plan. Matching action to speech, Jack walked them through the building's walls, Matching action to speech, Jack walked them through building the walls, with Shahar translating as usual. Okay, first we take the thinner saplings and split them lengthwise down the middle like so. Then we take the thicker saplings and lash them to the existing framework standing vertically, alternating them resting inside the frame and outside it, spacing them about 1.5 feet apart. Once those are all standing in the frame, we take the smaller strips and weave them back and forth through the smaller saplings. Once those are all standing in the frame, we take the smaller strips and weave them back and forth through the larger saplings. The next strip you put on the same manner, but reverse with the side of the sapling each side weaves between. Keep doing this until you form a wall. This is called the wattle. Phaean looked critically at Jack's work.
That would make a decent enough wall for summer. It'll be sturdy for a while, but it's way too porous and has no insulation. I hope you're not planning on filling in the gaps with clay or mud. They'll just wash off the first time it rains.
Jack nodded. It would if we used those independently, but you're getting ahead of the project. Next, we mix the mud, clay, and fibrous plants like so. This is called the daub. Jack started kneading a bunch of handfuls together into a paste-like combination of the three. His arms were thoroughly covered in grime, but Jack didn't seem to mind. He took a handful of the stuff and slapped it onto the frame he'd made just a little while earlier. As he spoke, he punctuated each pause with another generous handful of the muck. As you said before, individually, the material would normally just wash off. But once this dries, it'll be a little closer to something we call brick. Not quite as strong, but close enough for our purposes. And much quicker to slap up. Scraping the mud off his arms and flinging it to the ground, Jack continued, We can strengthen this further by painting the outside with something called whitewash after it's dried. Whitewash is just some slaked lime diluted in water. To get slaked lime, you grind down some limestone into powder, cook it to a sufficiently high temperature, and then add a bit of water to stabilize the mixture. Once that hardens, it'll last a surprisingly long time, and repairs are as easy as slapping more daub onto any holes or cracks that eventually form. Phaean still looked at the wall Jack was putting up somewhat skeptically, albeit it was going up surprisingly quickly.
What about the roof? It'll see more wear and tear than the walls.
Jack nodded as he finished cleaning his hands as best he could with the rag he'd brought. While he and Phaean spoke, Embrel and Lonthal had already started filling another section of the frame with the wattle. Eventually, I'd like to do straw roofs, but we'll have to grow enough straw to make that viable. For now, we're going to go with a 2-layer roof. The first layer will be a wattle and daub like the walls, but to protect that, you take a layer of sod and lay that on top. It's simply called a grass roof. If you do it properly, it'll provide plenty of insulation and protection, but it does take a lot more maintenance than a straw roof since you have to water it regularly. Fayen still didn't look convinced. Her arms were crossed as she inspected Jack's work. He was currently smoothing out the section he'd put up with a trowel. Honestly,
I think you're crazy. But as long as you pay my men and me, we'll do it your way. Given the supplies we currently have, and how quickly you were able to put up that wall, I'm guessing it'll take a little less than a week to get the first building up. Assuming the weather holds, that is.
Fayen was glaring up at the clear sky with further skepticism as she spoke. The sky was clear, but it was down in the 40s, colder than an Argoon typically was able to work for an extended time. Fayen hugged the coat Jack had provided a little tighter around herself as she spoke.
I'll sleep much easier once we get the first building completed. These tents you provided are better than I thought they'd be, but I doubt they'd be able to hold up if a storm hits.
Book 4 will be the start of a new series since you'll be keeping them to trilogies. Well, that's good. I won't have to worry about starting something completely new each time. Would Book 4 be something like Of Men and Of Men and Ghost Ships?
Excuse me.
Jack stepped back from his work and followed her gaze. So far, all I've seen is a bit of light snow, and even then only at night. How bad do winter storms get around here? Fayen shrugged.
It varies from year to year. Sometimes we'll only get smaller storms, enough to keep people shut into their houses for a few days until the snow is cleared, so we can walk around the village again. Some years, we get enough snow to lock us into our house for a week or two. When that happens, we always lose a few people, usually the very young or very old, but it's hard to predict.
The craftmaster glared into the sky.
The worst is when we get a cold storm. The temperatures drops far enough that even our homes aren't sufficient protection, and we have to gather in a single place to wait it out. If that happens here, we'll be in real trouble.
Jack had been hoping the whole winter would be as mild as what he'd seen so far, but he also suspected he wasn't that lucky. Well, if it gets bad, there are several options available to us, but at the very least, I think we need to get a larger stock of dried meat stored up, just in case. Ideally, I'd like to have at least a month's worth in storage. At that, Lonthal looked up from the job he'd been mixing alongside Emerald.
Well, if you want a lot more meat, 2 hunters are better than one. Jar is one of the better hunters I've worked with, and with her help, I can probably get you stocked up in a week or so. You'd still have Emerald around to translate.
Jack wasn't thrilled with the idea of losing Shahar for a week, let alone 2. What about the village? Could I trade more metal for additional meat? Lonthal shook his head.
This time of year, our meat stores can be the difference between life and death. It doesn't matter how much metal you offer. It can't be used by people who don't survive the winter.
Jack hadn't thought it would be that easy, but he was disappointed nonetheless. Then I guess we don't have a choice. Aside from the sled, is there anything else I can provide to help with... Aside from the sled, is there anything else I can provide to help out? Shahar looked thoughtful for a moment.
We'll need more heat packs and maybe a tent or some sleeping bags in case we get caught out by a storm. I can't think of anything else.
Jack sighed, his earlier energy suddenly drained. All right, I'll talk to Angela tonight. We'll get it all put together for you. Jack and Shahar were laying the cable for solar panels through the caves. As he worked, Jack found himself dwelling on Shahar being gone for the better part of 2 weeks. He was surprised at how much stress the mere idea caused him. He was also alarmed to realize how dependent upon Shahar he had become. True, she was his translator and bodyguard, but he'd been dependent... But he'd come to depend on her for so much more. Jack had always been a bit of a shut-in. Agoraphobia was the clinical term. The idea of leaving his comfortable space usually filled him with so much dread and anxiety, he would often turn his fears into anger and lash out at people or things that didn't deserve it. Oh, God. Sorry. The sentences go a bit long sometimes. Once he'd realized what was happening, he and Angela worked out several ideas and strategies to mitigate its influence on his life, but it was always a factor to be considered. However, on this planet, he'd wandered all over the countryside with hardly an issue. The big difference seemed to be that he had Shahar at his side throughout his The big difference seemed to be that he had Shahar The big difference seemed to be that he had Shahar at his side throughout his explorations. He'd come to depend on her presence to chase away his irrational fears. The long-term problems were obvious, but it was also unhealthy to become too reliant on someone else just to function in the short term. In short, this wasn't just a situation Jack needed to get past. It was a situation that Jack needed to take advantage of to center and rebalance himself. Not that he was looking forward to doing it, but anything else would be a disservice to Shahar and himself. Jack was so lost in thought that he hadn't noticed Shahar looking at him for the last couple of minutes. Her voice caught him off guard as it pierced through his internal gloom.
Maybe I'm missing something, but this doesn't seem like the kind of task that requires this level of concentration. Usually you'd be regaling me with some weird facts about history or science behind what we're doing. Once in a while, it's even interesting enough to help pass the time a little quicker.
Having been snapped out of his internal dialogue, Jack stuttered a bit as he tried to explain himself without offering up too much information. Sorry about that. I was a bit distracted, planning for upcoming events. Hearing that, Shahar raised an eye ridge in his direction. Her tongue flicked out as if trying to get a taste of the situation.
You must have been distracted. I gave you a perfect setup for some witty banter, and you let it pass unanswered. That's not like you.
Jack gave her a rueful smile as he rubbed the back of his neck in embarrassment. Yeah, there's been a lot on my mind recently. Getting this outpost set up, doing right by the workers, taking care of Embryl, repairing the ship to ensure Angela's survival, and doing right by you after all you've done for me, and now preparing for a possible winter storm. I feel like I'm a bit over my head. More than a bit, really. I'm always worried I'm going to forget something, and some important thing will slip through my fingers. Shahar laid down the cable she'd been working with and stood with her arms folded and her hips cocked to the side for a moment while she thought.
Well, I wouldn't worry about me. You've done right by me so far, and I'm confident that any further debt you incur will be paid in time. You've earned yourself a bit of trust and patience. Embryl's already found a chosen path to walk for a while. All you have to do is be supportive as she does it. You're already taking steps so you can set up the outpost and prepare for the winter. Now you just have to let things unfold and adapt when something happens to interrupt your plans. At this point, all worrying can do is get in the way of getting work done.
Jack took the not-so-subtle hint and got back to work, but continued to speak as he did so. Easy for you to say, but worrying is deeply ingrained into humans. On your world, there are only 2 or 3 things that look at you as food. On our planet, humanity was initially much lower on the food chain than that. We had to we had to be wary at all times, but also try and anticipate threats to avoid them altogether. There's always been a delicate balance between taking enough time to think through possible risks while not spending so much time thinking we create an even greater threat through inaction. Shahar laughed a little at that while she hefted another line of the cable into place.
Well, you stop and think enough for both of us, so I guess it's my job to give you a kick in the rear if you've been inactive for too long.
Thinking back to his earlier contemplations, Jack couldn't help but let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. When he spoke, it was at half volume and directed more to himself than Shahar. Yeah, I guess one of us needs to. There was something I was going to say, but I don't remember what it was. And now it's gone. Huzzah. Shahar gave Jack an odd look for a moment before speaking up.
You know I won't actually be gone for 2 weeks, right? Unless something unexpected happens. I'll be back home pretty much every night.
Jack looked somewhat flustered. I wasn't... Shahar looked like the cat who caught the mouse for a moment before smiling and responding.
Well, you didn't think I spent all day, every day with you, and not notice how afraid you actually are most of the time.
Jack looked terrified at having his secrets laid bare, but Shahar continued before he could react.
However, the only thing that matters is that the last time I found myself in an impossible, terrifying, borderline suicidal situation, you had my back. What's more, you got us both out of there alive. So I can give you a pass on the small stuff.
Jack found himself struggling with the oddest combination of relief and embarrassment. I didn't know I was that obvious. Shahar gave him a rare sympathetic smile. Jack had stopped being unsettled by how many teeth most of her smiles displayed a while ago. When Shahar spoke this time, her voice was less mischievous and more thoughtful. To most,
you probably aren't obvious, but we spend enough time together that it's hard to hide something like that for very long.
As the two of them laid the last of the cable out of the cave's mouth, Shahar stood up and stretched before dusting herself off. Jack couldn't help but take a second to admire how taut... Jack couldn't help but take a second to admire how her taut muscles moved while she pretended not to notice him looking. When she spoke again, her voice shifted to a more cheerful tone this time.
See, you'll be fine. Besides, this will be good for you. A little time away from me will help you get a fresh perspective on a few things.
This time Jack's laughter was a bit more genuine. You know, I was telling myself something similar when you dragged me out of my train of thought. Shahar winked at him.
What you're saying... what's that saying you used a while back? Great minds think alike.
Jack couldn't help but finish the quote. But fools rarely differ. So which are we? Great minds or fools? Shahar gave him the most somber, straight-faced expression she could as she answered.
Yes.
If looks could kill, Shahar would be in grave danger. Luckily for her, Jack's look was about as lethal to her as his punch would be. When he spoke, his voice was filled with all the annoyance he could muster. Thanks. You're a great help. As Shahar, Jack, and Emerald sat down to eat, Jack explained the situation to Emerald. So, with Shahar gone for a couple of weeks, he'll be in charge of translating between the workers and myself. However, this does mean you'll be taking fewer classes from Angela for a couple of weeks. Although I'm sure she'll find a way to fit a lesson in during breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Emerald looked a little nervous at the prospect.
But what if I make a mistake or say something wrong? What if I accidentally insult someone or worse?
Jack tried not to laugh at Emerald's fears. In many ways, they echoed his own. I'll be right there. I know your language just fine, so if you make any mistakes, I'll be able to help you straighten out any misunderstandings. Shahar nodded as she cut off a thick slice of something delicious smelling called roast beef before speaking.
If anything, the problem you're most likely to run into is telling Jack that he's explaining too much. He can get a little passionate about some subjects, and you might have to rein him in a little.
After she's finished speaking, Shahar took a bite of the roast. Her eyes closed in bliss as she savored the juices that shot out with every bite. Jack looked deeply offended at the accusation. I'm not that bad, am I? A little uncertainty wove its way into his voice. Angela answered on behalf of the other participants in the conversation, since they were both lost in the bliss of the meal. You're not that bad, most of the time. You just have to watch out for subjects you get a little passionate about, like the Lord of the Rings, for instance. Jack's expression was the definition of indignant as he responded. Jack's expression was the definition of indignant as he responded to the slander. Listen, too many people think Aragorn, Gandalf, or even Frodo were the heroes of the story, but J.R.R. Tolkien himself argued Sam was the real hero. I'm doing it right now, aren't I? Okay, for the record, Sam was the real hero, god damn it. Sam got Frodo as far as he did. Angela looked a little too pleased with herself as she examined her digital fingernails while she responded. Well, you know what they say. The first step in realizing you have a problem. Jack glared at Angela and the two Argoon, who were both doing their best to pretend they couldn't hear a word of the debate before sighing and letting the subject go. There was no way he was going to win this discussion with the jury so stacked against him. He was just about to take a bite of his own slice of the roast when Angela continued. Besides, we all know Legolas was the true hero of the story. He's so dreamy. Jack closed his eyes and counted to 10 before responding. Okay, I know you don't actually mean that, and you're saying that just to get a reaction out of me. That being said, you take that back, and you take it back right now. Those words are blasphemy, and I won't have it in my house. As Jack and Angela continued their debate, Shahar and Emerald wisely stayed out of it. Instead, they slowly whittled down the roast while the two siblings had at each other over the dinner table. Okay, we're going to stop there for now. Which is good, because I only wanted to do an hour, and it's been almost exactly an hour. So, I hope you enjoyed that. Oh. Oh, I remember what I was going to ask. Blackjack, since you're listening to a lot of this all the time, I'm a little worried that the Argoon voices are getting a little bit too samey because I'm just running out of them. Like, running out of variance between them. Have you noticed too much of a problem telling them apart? Like, if it wasn't for the in-between dialogue, could you probably tell them apart? Indeed, a nice reading. Thank you, Smams. I appreciate that. I really need to do some less story reading, or like less book reading, and try to get back to short stories at some point, but we're a little low on short stories. Oh, damn it, I was going to do Calliope's Tale this time. Ah, well. Next time, I guess. Yeah, I try. Faye's got more of a breathy voice to her voice. Emerald is younger. Lonthal is still an enigma, and I cannot nail down his voice. Um, Shahar is definitely feminine, but with the gravel added on top, and I'm glad that I did Shahar first because I've got a much better feel for her voice at this point. Also, I want to check something. What stories do we actually have? Calliope's Tale, Merry Christmas at the Gas Station, and Gestation Upside Down. I desperately need to find more short stories. What stories do we have pending? The Deal, Second Chances, and Diplomacy Human Style. Diplomacy Human Style, I am waiting on. I'm waiting to hear back from the author because they wanted to see. They wanted to take a look at the channel first. So we will see about that one. Second Chances and The Deal. I need to message the people on Tumblr. You probably shouldn't tell me that I've only met half the cast. Oh no. Oh no. I don't like that. We'll see. I'll have to find more ways. Anyway, no more stories for tonight. I gotta get to work on editing the ones that I've already read. So, we will wrap up here. I hope everyone does enjoy the story nights. These are a lot of fun for me because, I mean, for one thing, they allow me to get some ideas that I can these are great because a lot of the stories are stuff that I've never actually thought about. You won't sweat it on the number of them. You won't sweat it if a number of them sound similar-ish. Oh, good. Good. Because they probably will, unfortunately. There's a limit to how much different I can make them. There's some stuff that I'm still not really doing much with. We'll see. It is expanding my vocal range, I guess, to try and do as many voices as I can. Anyway, yeah, no. Thank you, everyone who's been supporting. Thank you to 10 Ace Games, Zebgrim, Slime Hunter, Walks with Gorillas, my dad, Krumlin Kev, Desalona, Miss Mango Plays, and BFF, Alpha Mango, Kawoke, Feritanium, Mully Copper, and Paper Dupless for continuing to support the stream. And also thank you to my author supporters who allow me to read their content on stream. Dr. Blackjack21, Gas Station Jack, Galgamos, Mercury the Dealer, Slightly Assholic, Kaiser5243, and Tendy Trucks 35 for Bart woke up and did a sneeze. Oh, look at the poor baby. All right. So I do hope everyone is enjoying this, though. I'm going to go edit some stuff. So until next time, I hope you all have a safe trip through the dark forest. Let's go raid someone. I actually am really appreciative of the people who do show up to the story streams, too. If it wasn't for the amount of time that I spend editing these, I would probably do them more often. Let me actually... This probably isn't an accurate list of people. Oh, hey, it wasn't. Jesus. Big streams are bust apparently today. Let's go ahead and raid Mother Gamer, who is playing a game called What Lies in the Multiverse, which I am not familiar with. All right. Laters, everyone.